My business partner tried to frame me for embezzlement, so I planted evidence that he was stealing from charity. I never thought I'd be the type of person to play dirty games, but sometimes life forces your hand in ways you never expect. The whole thing started 3 years ago when I decided to go into business with someone I thought was my closest friend. We had known each other since college, shared countless late nights studying, celebrated each other's successes, and supported each other through tough times. When he approached me with his business idea for a consulting firm, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to build something meaningful together. Our company focused on helping small businesses optimize their operations and financial management. We both brought different strengths to the table. I was better with numbers and client relationships, while he excelled at strategic planning and marketing. For the first 2 years, everything seemed to be going incredibly well. We were landing decent contracts, building a solid reputation in our community, and even managed to hire a small team of talented people who believed in our vision. But somewhere along the way, something changed in my partner's behavior. He started becoming more secretive about certain aspects of the business, would have hushed phone conversations that he'd quickly end when I walked into the room, and began insisting on handling all the financial reporting himself. Initially, I attributed this to his natural tendency to be protective of his work. But as weeks turned into months, my concern began to grow into something closer to suspicion. The first real red flag came when I noticed discrepancies in our quarterly reports. Small amounts here and there that didn't quite add up, client payments that seemed to be recorded differently than what I remembered discussing. When I brought these concerns to my partner, he would dismiss them as simple accounting errors or explain them away with complex reasoning that left me feeling confused rather than reassured. His explanations always sounded plausible in the moment, but later, when I'd try to piece together what he'd told me, the logic would fall apart. Things escalated dramatically when I discovered that he had been systematically moving money from our business accounts into what appeared to be personal investments. The amounts were significant enough to affect our company's ability to pay suppliers and employees on time. When I confronted him about this, he became defensive and aggressive in a way I had never seen before. He accused me of being paranoid and suggested that maybe I wasn't as good with finances as I thought I was. That conversation marked the beginning of what I can only describe as a calculated campaign to undermine my position in the company. He started excluding me from important meetings with clients, making unilateral decisions without consulting me, and slowly poisoning relationships with our employees by suggesting that I was becoming unreliable and difficult to work with. The psychological warfare was subtle but effective, and I found myself questioning my own judgment and abilities. The situation reached a breaking point when I received a certified letter from our accountant requesting an immediate meeting to discuss what he called serious irregularities in our books. My stomach dropped as I realized that someone had been feeding him false information about my involvement in the company's financial management. During that meeting, I learned that my partner had been building a case against me for embezzlement, complete with fabricated documentation and carefully crafted narratives about my supposed misconduct. The evidence he had assembled was sophisticated and damning. Bank records that had been altered to show unauthorized withdrawals from my personal accounts, emails that had been doctored to make it appear as though I was communicating with fictitious vendors, and witness statements from employees who claimed to have seen me behaving suspiciously around the office. The level of planning and deception required to create such an elaborate frame-up was both impressive and terrifying. What hurt most was realizing that someone I had trusted completely had been systematically destroying my reputation and livelihood, while maintaining a facade of friendship and partnership. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss could have, because it represented the complete destruction of a relationship that had been central to my adult life. I felt like I was living in a nightmare where nothing was as it seemed, and everyone around me had been turned against me. For several weeks, I struggled with depression and anxiety as I tried to figure out how to defend myself against accusations that seemed impossible to disprove. The fabricated evidence was convincing enough that even some of my closest friends began to question my innocence. I found myself isolated, financially strained, and facing the very real possibility of criminal charges that could destroy my career and reputation permanently. But then something unexpected happened that changed everything. While going through old files in my home office, I discovered a folder of documents that my partner had accidentally left behind after one of our working sessions. Inside were detailed records of his involvement with a local charity organization that I had never heard him mention before. The paperwork showed that he had been serving as their treasurer for over a year, with access to significant funds that were supposed to be used for community outreach programs. As I examined these documents more closely, I began to notice patterns that seemed familiar from my own investigation into our company's financial irregularities. The same type of creative accounting, the same methods of moving money between accounts, and the same elaborate paper trails designed to obscure the actual destination of funds. It became clear that my partner had been using his position with the charity as a testing ground for the techniques he would later use against me. The revelation that he had been stealing from a charity organization felt like a knife twisting in my chest. These were funds that were supposed to help families in need, provide educational opportunities for underprivileged children, and support community programs that made a real difference in people's lives. The thought that someone I had trusted was not only betraying me, but also robbing resources from the most vulnerable members of our community filled me with a rage that was both pure and righteous. I spent the next several days carefully documenting everything I had discovered, cross-referencing the charity records with publicly available information about their programs and finances. The evidence was overwhelming. My partner had been systematically diverting money from the charity into personal accounts, using sophisticated methods to cover his tracks and avoid detection. The amounts involved were substantial enough to constitute a serious felony, and the nature of the crime made it particularly heinous. But simply exposing his theft wouldn't be enough to clear my name or undo the damage he had done to my reputation and business. I needed to find a way to turn his own weapons against him, to use his calculated approach to destruction as a tool for my own vindication. The idea that formed in my mind was risky and morally ambiguous, but it felt like the only way to achieve true justice in a situation where the normal systems of accountability had failed me. I began to carefully construct a plan that would expose his charity theft, while simultaneously demonstrating the methods he had used to frame me. Instead of going directly to the authorities with my evidence, I decided to plant additional documentation that would make his crimes impossible to deny while also revealing his capacity for elaborate deception. The irony of using his own tactics against him was not lost on me, but I had moved beyond concerns about moral high ground. The first step was to create a paper trail that would lead investigators directly to his personal accounts and the money he had stolen from the charity. I used my knowledge of his methods to construct documentation that would be impossible to explain away or dismiss as coincidence. Bank records, email correspondence, and financial reports that painted a clear picture of systematic theft and deliberate deception. But the real masterstroke was creating evidence that would demonstrate his pattern of manipulation and frame-up tactics. I planted documents that showed how he had been testing his methods on smaller-scale victims before moving on to more elaborate schemes. Employee testimony that revealed his attempts to poison relationships and turn people against each other. A comprehensive record of his psychological manipulation techniques and his systematic approach to destroying trust and credibility. The challenge was making sure that this evidence would be discovered in a way that appeared natural and inevitable, rather than planted. I needed investigators to feel like they were uncovering a conspiracy through their own detective work, not following a trail that had been deliberately laid for them. This required careful timing and strategic placement of information in locations where it would be found during routine investigations. I also had to ensure that my own involvement in creating this evidence would be impossible to trace back to me. The documentation had to appear authentic and independently generated, with no fingerprints or digital traces that could link it to my efforts. This meant using public computers, creating false identities for communication, and employing techniques that would make the evidence appear to have come from multiple independent sources. The psychological pressure of maintaining this elaborate deception while continuing to defend myself against his accusations was almost unbearable. I found myself living a double life, playing the role of confused and injured business partner while simultaneously orchestrating a complex campaign of exposure and revenge. The stress affected my sleep, my appetite, and my ability to maintain normal relationships with friends and family members. But the most difficult part was waiting for the right moment to trigger the discovery of this planted evidence. I needed to time everything perfectly so that the revelation would have maximum impact while minimizing the risk of detection. Too early, and the evidence might not be taken seriously or might be dismissed as part of our ongoing business dispute. Too late, and I might find myself facing criminal charges before his crimes were exposed. The breakthrough came when I learned that the charity organization was planning to conduct their annual financial audit. This would provide the perfect opportunity for my planted evidence to be discovered by independent investigators who would have no reason to question its authenticity. I made sure that the most damaging documents would be found during this audit, while other pieces of evidence would be uncovered through follow-up investigations. The day the audit began, I felt a mixture of anticipation and terror that I had never experienced before. Everything I had worked for over the past few months hung in the balance, and there was no way to know for certain whether my plan would succeed or backfire spectacularly. I tried to maintain my normal routine, but every phone call and every unexpected conversation felt like it might be the moment when everything would either fall into place or collapse around me. The first sign that things were going according to plan came when I received a call from one of the charity's board members, asking if I had any knowledge of my partner's involvement with their organization. I feigned surprise and confusion, expressing shock that he had never mentioned his volunteer work with them. The concern in the board member's voice told me that they had discovered something significant during their audit. Within days, the story began to unfold exactly as I had hoped. The charity's investigation revealed systematic theft of funds, sophisticated methods of concealment, and a pattern of deception that extended far beyond their organization. When confronted with this evidence, my partner's carefully constructed facade began to crumble, and his attempts to deflect blame and create alternative explanations only made him appear more guilty. The revelation of his charity theft created a domino effect that completely changed the narrative around our business dispute. Suddenly, his accusations against me were seen in a new light, as investigators began to understand that he had a history of financial manipulation and false accusations. The same techniques he had used to frame me were now being used to expose his own crimes, and the irony was both satisfying and terrifying. As the investigation expanded, more evidence of his misconduct came to light. Employees who had been afraid to speak up before began to share their own experiences of his manipulation and deception. Clients who had noticed irregularities in their accounts started to come forward with their concerns. The web of lies and deception that he had woven around himself began to unravel at an accelerating pace. The most satisfying moment came when investigators discovered the planted evidence that revealed his systematic approach to destroying trust and credibility. The documentation showed not just what he had done, but how he had done it, providing a roadmap to his methods that made it impossible to deny his guilt. The psychological profile that emerged from this evidence painted a picture of someone who was both calculated and ruthless in his pursuit of personal gain. But the victory was not without its costs. The months of stress and deception had taken a significant toll on my mental and physical health. I found myself struggling with anxiety and depression even after my name had been cleared and my reputation restored. The experience had fundamentally changed my ability to trust others and had left me questioning whether I would ever be able to enter into another partnership or close business relationship. The legal proceedings that followed were long and complex, involving multiple jurisdictions and various types of fraud charges. My former partner eventually pleaded guilty to embezzlement, charity fraud, and several counts of making false statements to investigators. The sentence he received was substantial, but it felt inadequate compared to the damage he had caused to multiple victims and organizations. The charity organization was able to recover most of the stolen funds, but the damage to their reputation and their ability to serve the community took years to repair. Many of the families and individuals who had been depending on their services suffered as a result of his theft, and that knowledge continues to weigh heavily on my conscience. The ripple effects of his actions extended far beyond the immediate victims and affected the entire community's trust in charitable organizations. Our business ultimately survived the scandal, but in a much different form than I had originally envisioned. I bought out his share of the company at a significant discount and spent months rebuilding relationships with clients and employees who had been affected by the controversy. The process of restoring trust and credibility was slow and expensive, but it was ultimately successful. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of maintaining independent oversight and verification in business relationships. I implemented new procedures and safeguards that would make it much more difficult for anyone to manipulate financial records or create false documentation. I also learned to pay closer attention to changes in behavior and to trust my instincts when something feels wrong. Looking back on the entire ordeal, I still struggle with the moral implications of my actions. While I succeeded in exposing his crimes and clearing my name, the methods I used involved deception and manipulation that were not fundamentally different from his own tactics. The line between justice and revenge became blurred in ways that continue to trouble me, and I wonder whether there might have been a better way to achieve the same results. The planted evidence was never discovered or questioned by investigators, and my role in its creation remains a secret that I carry alone. This knowledge creates a complicated relationship with my vindication, because I know that my victory was not achieved through purely honest means. The moral ambiguity of the situation continues to affect how I view myself and my actions, even years after the events concluded. Despite these concerns, I cannot honestly say that I regret my actions. The alternative would have been to accept false accusations and allow a criminal to continue victimizing innocent people and organizations. The charity theft might never have been discovered without my intervention, and countless additional victims might have suffered as a result. Sometimes the pursuit of justice requires methods that are less than ideal, and I have learned to live with that reality. The experience also taught me about the importance of documentation and evidence in protecting yourself against false accusations. I now maintain much more detailed records of all business transactions and communications, and I make sure that important decisions are always witnessed and documented by multiple parties. These precautions may seem paranoid to some, but they provide peace of mind and protection against future manipulation. Today, my business is stronger and more successful than it ever was during the partnership. The lessons learned from that difficult period have made me a better manager and a more careful judge of character. I have built a team of trustworthy individuals who share my values and commitment to ethical business practices, and we have developed a reputation for integrity and reliability that attracts high-quality clients and employees. The former partner is now serving his sentence and will likely face additional civil lawsuits from various victims when he is released. His professional reputation has been completely destroyed, and he will probably never be able to work in a position of financial responsibility again. While I take no joy in his suffering, I feel satisfied that justice was ultimately served and that his victims received some measure of compensation for their losses. The charity organization has fully recovered from the scandal and has actually grown stronger as a result of implementing new oversight procedures and transparency measures. They now serve more families and children than ever before, and their reputation for integrity and effectiveness has been restored. Knowing that they were able to overcome the damage caused by his theft provides some comfort and helps to justify the difficult choices I made during that period. In the end, the experience was transformative in ways that I could never have anticipated. It forced me to confront difficult questions about morality, justice, and the nature of trust in professional relationships. While the methods I used were morally ambiguous, the results achieved a form of justice that would not have been possible through conventional means. The knowledge that I was able to protect future victims and restore resources to a charitable organization helps me to live with the ethical compromises that were necessary to achieve these goals.